Take those cuffs off him, deputy. Right now. The command carried across the dusty roadside with enough authority to silence every voice within earshot. But Deputy Travis Cole had no idea those words were only minutes away. For now, he believed the badge on his chest made him untouchable. The late afternoon sun burned over Red Creek County, Texas, turning the open fields beyond Highway 17 into waves of gold and copper. A weathered pickup sat beside a wooden fence, its engine still ticking softly beneath the heat. Standing near it was Isaiah Brooks, a 52-year-old black rancher whose family had worked this land for 3 generations. His boots were dusty, his denim shirt carried the marks of a long morning repairing fence posts, and his expression remained remarkably calm as Deputy Cole stepped from his cruiser and approached him. Hands where I can see them. Isaiah slowly raised both hands. They're right here, deputy. Cole's eyes moved from Isaiah to the sprawling ranch behind him, nearly 800 acres stretching toward the distant tree line. What are you doing on this property? Isaiah glanced toward the faded wooden sign beside the gate. Brooks Family Ranch. EST 1958. Working, he answered. Cole gave a short, humorless laugh. Working for who? Isaiah studied him for a moment. There was something heavier than suspicion in the deputy's voice, something Isaiah had heard before in stores, offices, and roadside conversations where people decided who he was before asking his name. Still, he kept his voice measured. I own this ranch. The silence that followed lasted barely 2 seconds, but it changed the air between them. Cole looked toward the house in the distance, then back at Isaiah. You expect me to believe all this belongs to you? Isaiah's jaw tightened. He could hear cattle shifting behind the fence and cicadas buzzing beneath the Texas heat. Somewhere farther down the road, a tractor slowed. Someone was watching. My registration is in the truck, Isaiah said. My name is on the property records. You can verify everything. But Cole wasn't interested in verification. He had already chosen the story he wanted to believe. Turn around. Isaiah didn't move. For what? Don't make this difficult. The words came quietly, almost casually, and somehow that made them colder. Isaiah looked at the badge, then directly into Cole's eyes. I'm standing on my own land, beside my own truck, offering you proof. What exactly are you arresting me for? Cole reached toward the handcuffs on his belt. Isaiah exhaled slowly. He wasn't frightened of the metal. He was thinking about something else. The security camera mounted above the ranch gate, the neighbor watching from across the highway, and Sheriff Daniel Mercer, the man who had personally promised the county that every deputy would answer to the same law they enforced. Cole hadn't noticed the camera. He hadn't noticed the witness. And he certainly didn't know that Sheriff Mercer was already driving toward Brooks Ranch after receiving a concerned call over the radio. Isaiah finally turned around, dignity intact, his voice almost unervingly calm. Deputy, before you do this, you should be absolutely certain you're willing to explain why. Cole smirked. He thought Isaiah was bluffing. He thought this was another roadside stop that would disappear into paperwork before sunset. Then, less than a mile away, a sheriff's SUV turned onto Highway 17, its tires rolling through the Texas dust, carrying the one man who could end Travis Cole's career with a sentence. The handcuffs closed with a quiet metallic click, and Isaiah Brooks stared across the pasture he had known since childhood, refusing to let humiliation change the way he carried himself. Deputy Travis Cole stepped back with the satisfied expression of a man who believed the difficult part was over. You could have made this easier, Cole said. Isaiah looked toward the weathered ranch house nearly half a mile beyond the gate. His grandfather had rebuilt that house after a storm in 1973. His father had taught him to ride along the eastern fence before Isaiah was tall enough to reach the stirrups comfortably. Every acre around him carried a memory, yet a stranger wearing a county badge had looked at his face and decided those memories could not possibly belong to him. I offered you identification, Isaiah said. I offered you the registration. I told you where to find the property records. Cole opened the rear door of his cruiser. You can explain everything downtown. Across Highway 17, Earl Patterson had stopped his tractor beside a field entrance. The 68-year-old farmer had known Isaiah for more than 30 years, and he was watching carefully now, one hand holding his telephone. Deputy, Earl called from across the road. That is Isaiah Brooks. This is his property. Cole turned toward him. Stay out of police business. Earl did not argue. He simply lifted his telephone slightly, making it clear that the conversation was being documented. For the first time, Cole's confidence flickered. Isaiah noticed it. Then another detail changed everything. A vehicle appeared beyond the curve roughly 3/4 of a mile away, moving steadily toward the ranch. Isaiah recognized the dark county sport utility vehicle immediately. Cole did not. He was too busy reaching into Isaiah's pickup after finally deciding to inspect the documents he had dismissed minutes earlier. He pulled the registration from the center console and read the name printed across it. Isaiah Brooks. His eyes shifted toward the ranch gate. Brooks Family Ranch. Then toward Isaiah. The smirk disappeared. Something wrong? Isaiah asked. Cole folded the registration too quickly. Ownership does not explain why you were reported as suspicious. Reported by whom? No answer came. Isaiah had suspected there had never been a meaningful complaint. Cole looked toward his cruiser as if paperwork might somehow rescue him from the question. The approaching vehicle was closer now, perhaps a 1/4 mile away, sunlight flashing across its windshield. Earl recognized it and lowered his telephone slightly. Isaiah remained still. He could feel the afternoon heat against his face and hear the dry grass moving beneath the wind. He understood something Cole had not yet realized. The truth did not need Isaiah to shout. It only needed witnesses and time. The county vehicle slowed beside the ranch entrance. Sheriff Daniel Mercer stepped out wearing his tan uniform and campaign hat, his expression unreadable as he surveyed the scene. Isaiah restrained beside his own fence, Earl recording from across the highway, and Deputy Cole holding a registration bearing the rancher's name. Mercer walked toward them without rushing. Deputy Cole, he said. Cole straightened immediately. Sheriff, I can explain. Mercer stopped several feet away and looked first at Isaiah, then at the handcuffs, then at the document in Cole's hand. His voice remained calm. I certainly hope you can. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Sheriff Daniel Mercer extended his hand toward Deputy Travis Cole, and Cole slowly passed him the registration. Mercer read the name once, then looked at the wooden ranch sign, then at Isaiah Brooks standing beside the cruiser. What was the reason for the arrest? Mercer asked. Cole cleared his throat. Suspicious activity, Sheriff. I received information about someone who might not belong on the property. Mercer lifted his eyes. What information? Cole hesitated. That hesitation was small, but everyone noticed it. Earl Patterson continued recording from across Highway 17. Isaiah remained silent. Mercer waited. A report, Cole finally said. Who made it? Another pause. Cole glanced toward his patrol car. I would have to check the call record. Mercer reached for the radio clipped near his shoulder and requested dispatch verification of any complaint connected to Brooks Family Ranch during the previous hour. The answer came quickly. There was no recorded call. No trespassing complaint. No suspicious person report. Nothing. The Texas wind moved through the dry grass, while Cole's explanation seemed to disappear with it. Mercer lowered his radio. So nobody called? Cole shifted his weight. I saw him near the gate and decided to investigate. Isaiah finally spoke. He asked what I was doing here. I told him I owned the ranch. I offered identification and documents before he restrained me. Mercer looked directly at Cole. Did he refuse identification? Not exactly. Did he threaten anyone? No. Was there evidence of a crime? Cole's face tightened. I was still investigating. Mercer turned toward Isaiah. Mr. Brooks, I am going to remove those handcuffs. The release came quietly. Isaiah brought his hands forward and adjusted his sleeves, saying nothing. That silence carried more weight than anger could have. Mercer handed Isaiah the registration with deliberate respect. I apologize for what happened on your property. Isaiah accepted it. I appreciate that, Sheriff, but I think we both know an apology is only the beginning. Mercer nodded because he did know. Red Creek County had spent years trying to rebuild trust between deputies and rural communities scattered across hundreds of square miles. One reckless encounter could expose something deeper than poor judgment. It could reveal the assumptions hiding beneath authority. Mercer turned back toward Cole. Where is your body camera? Cole's expression changed again. His hand moved instinctively toward the front of his uniform. It should be recording. Mercer examined the indicator. It is not. Earl called from across the road. Mine is. Cole looked toward him, suddenly understanding why the older farmer had never lowered his telephone. Then Isaiah glanced toward the ranch entrance. There is another camera above the gate. Cole followed his gaze upward. Mounted beneath the wooden beam was a small security camera pointed directly toward the roadside. Every question, every answer, every opportunity to verify the truth. Recorded. Mercer stared at the camera for a long moment before looking back at Cole. His disappointment had hardened into something colder. "Deputy, give me your badge." Cole blinked. "Sheriff, your badge," Mercer repeated. Now, the highway seemed impossibly quiet. Cole had arrived believing he controlled the story. Now 3 witnesses existed: a neighbor, a camera, and the truth itself. Travis Cole stared at Sheriff Mercer as though he had misunderstood the order. For years, the badge had been more than metal to him. It had opened doors, ended arguments, and convinced people that his version of events would automatically carry more weight than theirs. Now Mercer stood beneath the fading Texas sun with one hand extended, waiting for Cole to surrender it. "Sheriff, this is unnecessary," Cole said. "I made a judgment." "Call." Mercer did not move. "A judgment call based on what?" Cole glanced toward Isaiah, then toward Earl Patterson across Highway 17, then finally toward the camera above the ranch gate. "I thought something was wrong." Isaiah's expression remained steady. "You thought I was wrong," he said quietly. "There is a difference." The words settled over the roadside. Cole opened his mouth, but Mercer spoke first. "Badge and identification card." This time there was no hesitation in the command. Cole slowly removed the badge and placed it in Mercer's palm, followed by his department identification. Mercer looked down at them for a moment, then back at the deputy. "You are relieved of duty effective immediately, pending formal review." Cole's face lost color. "Over one stop." Mercer shook his head. "This stopped being about one stop when you ignored identification, invented a report that dispatch cannot verify, detained a property owner without establishing a lawful reason, and failed to activate your body camera." Cole looked toward Isaiah as frustration replaced disbelief. He could have just cooperated. Isaiah almost smiled, but there was no humor in it. "I did cooperate. What I would not do was agree with an assumption about me that was never true." Earl lowered his telephone, though he kept the recording running. The sun had fallen closer to the horizon, stretching long shadows across the shoulder of the highway. A pickup passed slowly, its driver glancing toward the cluster of vehicles before continuing west. Mercer stepped closer to Cole, lowering his voice without softening it. "The authority we carry is supposed to make people safer. It is not permission to decide who belongs somewhere based on who you expect to see there." Cole looked away. For the first time since arriving, he seemed smaller than the uniform he wore. But Isaiah was not interested in humiliation. He had experienced enough of that already. "Sheriff," he said, "before this becomes one deputy taking the blame for everything, I want the record preserved." Mercer turned toward him. Isaiah pointed toward the ranch camera. "The entire recording. Dispatch logs. His previous stops. Complaints, if there are any. I want this handled by the process you tell this county to trust." Mercer studied him carefully. Isaiah could have demanded revenge. Instead, he demanded accountability. "You have my word," Mercer said. Cole gave a bitter laugh. "So that is it. He complains, and my career disappears." Mercer looked directly at him. "No. Evidence decides what happens next." Then Earl crossed the highway carrying his telephone. "Sheriff," he said, "there is something else you should hear." He stopped the recording at an earlier moment and raised the volume. Cole's own voice came through clearly from the speaker. Mercer listened without interruption. Isaiah watched Cole's expression change as the words he had spoken only minutes earlier returned to the roadside, no longer protected by memory, interpretation, or a badge. And when the recording ended, Mercer looked at Cole with a certainty that had not been there before. Mercer did not speak immediately after the recording ended. He simply held Earl Patterson's telephone and stared toward the fields as the final light of afternoon stretched across Brooks' family ranch. The silence was worse for Cole than an argument would have been. Arguments could be challenged. Silence left him alone with his own words. Mercer finally returned the telephone to Earl. "Send that recording directly to my office and keep the original copy." Earl nodded. "Already backed it up." Cole shifted beside the cruiser. "Sheriff, whatever you think you heard, I was trying to establish control of an uncertain situation." Mercer turned toward him. "There was no uncertain situation until you created one." Isaiah watched the exchange without satisfaction. He had spent more than 30 years building the ranch into what it was now, expanding the herd, repairing old wells, surviving drought seasons that turned ponds into cracked earth, and working mornings that began before sunrise. He had learned patience because ranching demanded it. You could not force rain from a clear sky. You could not make cattle move faster by losing your temper. And you could not make truth stronger by shouting it. "There is something I want you to understand," Isaiah said. Cole looked at him reluctantly. "When you asked what I was doing here, that was a fair question if you genuinely believed something was wrong. But when I answered, you stopped investigating. You started deciding." Cole said nothing. Isaiah continued. "You saw this ranch. You saw me. And somehow those two things did not fit together in your mind." Mercer lowered his gaze briefly. The distinction was impossible to ignore. Cole had been offered the registration before the detention. He had been given Isaiah's name. A neighboring farmer had confirmed his identity. The ranch sign itself carried the same family name. Every piece of information had pointed toward an ordinary explanation, yet Cole had treated each fact as an obstacle rather than evidence. Mercer reached for his radio and requested another supervisor to respond to the location. Cole's eyes widened. "Why do you need another supervisor?" "Because I am documenting this correctly from this moment forward," Mercer answered. "Your cruiser stays here until the camera system is secured. Your equipment will be inventoried. The roadside recording will be preserved. The ranch footage will be copied with Mr. Brooks's permission. Dispatch records will be reviewed." Cole looked toward Isaiah. "You are really going through all this?" Isaiah met his eyes. "You were willing to take me downtown without checking a piece of paper 10 feet away." "Yes, Deputy. We are going through all of this." A second county vehicle appeared in the distance. Mercer watched it approach before turning back to Cole. "There is another issue." Cole's shoulders stiffened. Mercer had already remembered 2 complaints from earlier that year, both dismissed after conflicting accounts and missing video. At the time, there had not been enough evidence to establish what happened. Now the inactive body camera, the non-existent dispatch call, and Earl's recording gave those old reports a different weight. "This review is not starting with today," Mercer said. "It is starting with your record." For the first time, Cole did not defend himself. The approaching vehicle rolled onto the shoulder as twilight settled over the ranch, and Isaiah realized the moment had become larger than what happened to him. The question was no longer whether one deputy had made one bad decision. The question was how many people had stood where Isaiah stood without a ranch camera, without a witness across the highway, and without the sheriff arriving in time. The second county vehicle stopped beside the shoulder, and Lieutenant Maria Alvarez stepped out into the cooling Texas evening. She had served Red Creek County for nearly 18 years, long enough to recognize when an ordinary call had become something much more serious. Mercer met her halfway between the vehicles and spoke quietly while Cole stood several yards away, stripped of the badge that had seemed so powerful less than an hour earlier. Isaiah remained beside the ranch gate with Earl, watching without interfering. Alvarez listened carefully, then looked toward Cole, the inactive body camera, and the security camera mounted above the entrance. "I will secure the department equipment," she said. Mercer nodded. "And I want the complete incident history reviewed tonight." Cole heard him. "Sheriff, you already relieved me of duty. What else are you trying to prove?" Mercer turned. "I am not trying to prove anything. I am trying to find out what the evidence proves." Alvarez opened the cruiser and began documenting the equipment inside. Every item was recorded. Every time was noted. Nothing would depend on memory tomorrow. Isaiah respected that. He had spent his life learning that details mattered. A broken section of fence ignored today could mean missing cattle tomorrow. Accountability worked the same way. Small failures became larger ones when everyone agreed not to notice them. Earl stepped closer to Isaiah. "You doing all right?" he asked softly. Isaiah looked across the pasture where the first evening shadows were settling near the cattle pens. "I will be." But his voice carried something deeper than fatigue. His grandfather had purchased the first 120 acres of the ranch when opportunities for a black rancher in that part of Texas had been limited by more than money. His father had expanded it acre by acre. Isaiah had inherited not merely land, but proof of persistence. That was why Cole's disbelief had cut deeper than the detention itself. The deputy had looked at 3 generations of work and decided ownership was impossible before checking a single document. Mercer approached Isaiah again. "Mr. Brooks, Lieutenant Alvarez can take your statement here, or we can arrange another time." Isaiah considered the question. "Here is fine." His account was simple. No exaggeration. No revenge. He described where he had been standing, what Cole had asked, when he offered identification, and how Cole responded. Earl confirmed what he had witnessed. Then Isaiah unlocked the ranch office and provided access to the gate recording. The footage matched the timeline precisely. Cole watched from a distance as certainty replaced ambiguity. When Alvarez finished, she walked back toward Mercer holding her department tablet. "Sheriff, there is something you need to see." She had already pulled Cole's internal history. 3 prior complaints involved motorists who said he had questioned whether they belonged in neighborhoods where they lived or worked. 2 involved black residents. 1 involved a Latino contractor. Each case had closed without discipline because independent evidence had been unavailable. Mercer read the summaries twice. His expression tightened. Cole stepped forward. Those complaints were cleared. Alvarez looked at him. They were unresolved. That is not the same thing. The distinction landed hard. Isaiah said nothing, but he understood exactly what it meant. Today had not created a pattern. Today had given the pattern a camera. Mercer closed the file and looked toward Cole. "You will report to my office tomorrow morning for formal notice." Cole swallowed. Notice of what? Mercer held his gaze. Termination proceedings. And beneath the deepening Texas sky, the authority Cole had used so carelessly was no longer his to command. For the first time that evening, Travis Cole looked genuinely uncertain. "Termination?" he repeated, as though the word belonged to someone else's life. Sheriff Mercer did not raise his voice. He did not need to. "You were trusted with authority, Deputy Cole. Tonight, the evidence shows. You used suspicion where investigation was required, ignored information that contradicted your assumptions, and then gave me an explanation dispatch records could not support." Cole looked toward Isaiah. "So his word matters more than mine?" Mercer shook his head. "That question is exactly the problem. This is not about whose word matters more. We have the registration, the property records, Earl's recording, the gate camera, dispatch logs, and your inactive body camera. Facts do not belong to either side." Lieutenant Alvarez stood beside the cruiser, quietly completing the equipment inventory while the Texas sky faded from orange to deep blue. Cole seemed to search for another argument, but every direction led back to evidence. "I have served this county for 9 years, he said. "Does that mean nothing?" Isaiah answered before Mercer could. "It should mean more was expected of you." Cole turned toward him. Isaiah's voice remained controlled, almost gentle, which made the words harder to dismiss. 9 years means you had 9 years to understand what that badge asks from you. Patience, judgment, restraint, the willingness to discover that your first assumption might be wrong. Cole stared at the ground. Somewhere beyond the pasture, cattle moved toward the water trough, their low calls carrying through the evening air. Life on the ranch continued as though nothing extraordinary had happened, and Isaiah found something comforting in that. This land had survived drought, debt, storms, and generations of people who doubted the Brooks family belonged on it. It would survive one deputy's assumptions too. Mercer asked Alvarez to drive Cole back to the county office. Before leaving, Cole paused beside the passenger door and looked toward Isaiah. "I did not wake up this morning planning for any of this to happen." Isaiah studied him. Most people do not plan their worst decisions. They reveal themselves one choice at a time. Cole had no response. Alvarez opened the vehicle door, and moments later the county sport utility vehicle disappeared east along Highway 17. Earl finally stopped recording. Mercer remained behind. "Mr. Brooks, there will be paperwork tomorrow, and the county attorney may contact you. I also intend to reopen those previous complaints for administrative review." Isaiah nodded. "Good." Mercer seemed surprised by the simplicity of the answer. "You are not asking what punishment he will get. That is not my job." Isaiah looked toward the ranch sign above them. "My job is to tell the truth about what happened. Your job is to decide whether your department means what it says about serving everyone." Mercer absorbed that quietly. The next morning, Red Creek County woke beneath a clear Texas sky. At 8:15, Cole entered the sheriff's office without a badge. By 8:40, Mercer had the verified recordings, dispatch report, equipment log, and preliminary review on his desk. At 8:47, Cole was handed formal notice that his employment was being terminated under county procedure. There was no cheering, no public spectacle, just paper sliding across a desk and consequences arriving with it. Yet Mercer knew the most difficult part was still ahead. Because removing one deputy was easy compared with answering the question Isaiah's experience had exposed. How many earlier warnings had the department failed to hear? By mid-morning, the story had already begun moving beyond the walls of the sheriff's office. Earl Patterson had not posted his recording online, and Isaiah had not called a reporter, but Red Creek County was the kind of place where unusual events traveled quickly through feed stores, diners, church parking lots, and ranch roads. People had seen the county vehicles outside Brooks' family ranch. They had heard that a deputy had left without his badge. By 10 o'clock, Sheriff Mercer's telephone was ringing steadily. He refused to turn the incident into a spectacle. His public statement was brief. A deputy had been terminated following documented violations of department policy, and previous complaints connected to that deputy were being reopened for review. He did not name Isaiah. He did not offer excuses. Most importantly, he did not call the incident a misunderstanding. Isaiah appreciated that distinction. A misunderstanding was taking the wrong highway exit or arriving at the wrong ranch gate. What happened beside Highway 17 had been a sequence of choices. That afternoon, Isaiah returned to repairing the same fence post he had been working on before Cole arrived. The temperature had climbed into the low 90s, and sunlight shimmered above the pasture. He drove a new staple into the cedar post, checked the wire tension, and moved to the next section. Work had always been how the Brooks family answered difficult days. His father used to say that land remembered consistency better than promises. Around 3 o'clock, a familiar county vehicle appeared near the gate. Mercer stepped out alone. This time there were no flashing lights, no radios, no tense commands. He carried a folder. "I thought you deserved to hear this directly," he said. Isaiah rested his gloves on the truck bed. Mercer explained that the initial review of Cole's previous complaints had uncovered something troubling. Several residents had described remarkably similar encounters. Different roads, different dates. The same pattern of questioning whether people belonged where they were found, followed by reports written in language that made ordinary behavior sound suspicious. None of the earlier cases had contained enough independent evidence to establish the pattern clearly. Now investigators had something they had lacked before, a documented incident showing how Cole behaved when his assumptions were challenged by facts. Isaiah looked across the pasture. So those people were telling the truth. Mercer chose his words carefully. "We are reviewing each case independently, but their complaints deserved more attention than they received." Isaiah nodded slowly. That answer mattered more than an easy promise. "What happens now?" "Every complaint involving Cole gets reviewed again. We are also changing policy. Body cameras will be checked automatically at the beginning of every shift, and supervisors will audit stops involving property disputes and suspicious person calls." Isaiah studied him. "Policies are paper." Mercer nodded. "Until people enforce them." For the first time since the roadside encounter, Isaiah smiled faintly. Mercer understood. This was not about creating perfect rules. It was about refusing to look away when those rules were ignored. Before leaving, Mercer glanced at the old ranch sign. "Your grandfather put that up?" "My father did. The original one rotted years ago." Mercer looked toward the hundreds of acres beyond it. "Your family built something remarkable here." Isaiah picked up his gloves. "It was remarkable yesterday, too." Mercer lowered his eyes, understanding the lesson immediately. The ranch had never needed a sheriff's approval to become worthy of respect. Isaiah had never needed a title, a powerful connection, or a hidden identity to deserve fair treatment. The truth had been visible from the beginning. The failure belonged to the man who refused to see it. 3 weeks later, Isaiah Brooks stood beside the same wooden gate where everything had begun, but the morning felt different. A cool breeze moved across the pasture, carrying the smell of dry grass and fresh coffee from the mug resting on the hood of his pickup. The ranch was quiet except for cattle moving beyond the eastern fence and the distant hum of a tractor. Life had returned to its familiar rhythm, yet the consequences of that afternoon were still unfolding across Red Creek County. The sheriff's office had completed its first review of Cole's previous complaints, and 2 cases once dismissed for lack of independent evidence had been reopened. Sheriff Mercer had also introduced new supervisory checks for body cameras, documentation standards, and suspicious person calls. None of those changes could rewrite what happened, but Isaiah understood something his father had taught him years earlier. Repairing a broken fence did not erase the moment it failed. It simply meant you had finally decided not to leave the opening there. Earl Patterson drove up shortly after sunrise and parked beside the gate. "County meeting is tonight," he said. Isaiah nodded. Residents had been invited to speak about trust, accountability, and how deputies handled calls involving private property. Several people had already contacted Isaiah, including strangers who told him stories they had kept quiet for years because they assumed nobody would believe them. Isaiah had listened without promising anything except that he would not forget. That evening, the county meeting room filled until people were standing along the back wall. Ranchers sat beside teachers, store owners, deputies, church members, and families who had lived in Red Creek County for generations. Mercer sat near the front, not behind a raised desk, but among everyone else. When Isaiah's name was called, he walked to the microphone without notes. He did not speak about revenge. He did not celebrate Cole losing his position. Instead, he looked across the room and said, "The most important thing about what happened to me is not that I owned 800 acres. It is not that I had a camera. It is not that I knew my rights. The important thing is that none of those facts should have been necessary for me to be treated fairly." The room became completely still. Isaiah continued, "A person should not need property, money, influence, or the right connection before dignity becomes available to them. Respect is supposed to come first." Mercer lowered his head for a moment. Several deputies listened without moving. Earl sat near the aisle, watching his friend with quiet pride. Isaiah looked toward the sheriff. "You removed one deputy. That was your responsibility. What matters now is what happens when there is no camera and no neighbor recording from across the road." Mercer met his gaze and nodded. Months later, the ranch gate still carried the same weathered family name. Travelers passing Highway 17 would never know what happened there. Isaiah preferred it that way. He had never wanted the ranch to become a monument to humiliation. It was a monument to endurance long before Cole arrived. One evening, Isaiah stood beneath that sign watching the Texas sunset turn the fields copper and gold. His grandfather had fought to own this land. His father had fought to keep it. Isaiah had spent his life building upon it. A badge had questioned his place there for a few minutes, but truth had answered without shouting. Authority could demand attention. It could wear a uniform and speak with confidence. But authority without fairness was only power pretending to be justice, and sooner or later, the truth would ask to see its credentials.